finally we're in Don Quixote Part 2. I spent such an annoying time trying to upload a 23-minute video, so this time I will just make this half the time. About 10 minutes or so. Let's get this started with right now. Don Quixote is written by Cervantes, and today we're going to be talking about chapter 27 to 52. In chapter 27 in chapter 26 we left off with Cardenio, Barber and Priest finding Cardenio, and so that happened, and then they also, technically, in chapter 27, they found Cardenio again. Well, they just repeat the whole adventure thing, and then they make Cardenio talk about the story, and he just fills him up to the point where he told Don Quixote, and then it continues to where it left off. Cardenio says that Lucinda, basically, he goes to the marriage procession, and then Lucinda basically says, okay, it's cool, I'll kill myself. And yeah, it's cool, I'll kill myself, because turns out that during those 8 days that Don Fernando sent Cardenio to go ahead and do something. Turns out it's like buying horses, which he could have done himself, and like borrow money to buy some horses, which that is not really a legal thing, and he does not, and it doesn't really matter if Don Fernando's parents find out, because it's not a big deal, really. He could just go there himself, because it would actually make more sense for him to go there himself. And so that happened, and lots of crazy adventures happened again, too. This time, however, it goes in the form of Cardenio finding out that Lucinda has been convinced by her, Don Fernando convinced Lucinda's dad to let him marry her, not this Cardenio guy who everyone hates, and also their parents approve, and it was just a matter of time for them to get married. And so after that kicked off, lots of other things seemed to happen. One of those including the fact that, Don Quixote is finally, going to be cured of his madness. But before they actually go ahead and do the placing, their, little plan to trick Don Quixote to go into, somewhere to go back to his home so that he could, fight a giant. And then they find this, a very pretty boy. And under closer inspection, it turns out it's not a pretty boy, but it's a pretty girl and in disguise as a boy. I guess lots of people would immediately assume that this pretty girl has just went ahead and went herself into disguise so that she wouldn't be pestered by random people on the street or random men on the street just trying to see jackpot, you're a hot girl or something like that. And so Dorothea at first is startled by them and tries to do something to them because she's a little annoyed again that why are these men here right now? That's probably what what she's imagining, or at least thinking that. At least that's what I'm thinking that she's imagining. Next up is that that's not exactly what happens, and Dorothea finally realizing that these three people aren't hostile, except for the one wild man who really does seem a little hostile, I guess, because he looks like a wild man, and fills her up on her part of the story. Turns out that she's been in a wealthy peasant family, and one day she met her the duke's that she's living on, a second son, and that turns out to be one Don Fernando. What a coincidence! And then, basically that happened, and then turns out that he's been pestered by her and was flattered and liked her basically, and then went ahead and just pestered her family with gifts and love letters, and she's kind of annoyed. Her mom and dad are basically also said that, hey, if you want to marry the local rich boy to get this guy off your back, then we'll support whoever you pick. And so because she's liable to the fact that now that she could be married, the possibility of she marrying is big. Now, if I don't do this now, then there will be no other chance. He breaks into her room one night and convinces her and gives her a proposal of marriage, and then it turns out that marriage could give her what she couldn't ever get before, which was status, and she really needed some status to actually get up to the high ranks. And so that happened. They banged each other, and then they went ahead and stopped the night. And then he went ahead, and they decided to get married later on. They were engaged, basically. However, 3 months later, Dorothea basically found out that he was marrying Lucinda, and took away her boy servant's clothes, disguised as him, and went away and on search to the place. And then when she arrived there, basically this happened. No, that wasn't what happened. Not like this. This actually happened. You don't know the whole story because that's just what the expression is, and filter up into the point what happened next. After Lucinda said yes, basically this happened. Lucinda fainted, and then there was a letter under. They found a letter on her saying that she was already married to Cardenio, and only marrying him would be just for her father's purpose. But she really liked Cardenio, and that she would rather kill herself with this dagger other than just marry him. And so turns out Don Fernando was very enraged by this letter and tried to kill her in the process, only stopped by his parents. And turns out Lucinda woke up like the next day finding out that Cardenio was like how wronged he was by her and that he was going somewhere that he'll never see her again. And so that happens, and then they fill Dorothy on their part story, and then Cardenio finds out that this is the peasant girl that Don Fernando liked before he went ahead and tried to goes ahead with Lucinda. Turns out Don Fernando likes the chase, not the cat. Turns out, and then that happened, and then later on, those wineskins seemed to. And then later on, Dorothy had said that she'd be a much more convincing damsel in distress because she actually read those stories, and that she is a damsel. Also, not a damsel in distress, also. And so they go up and they tell him to, tell Don Quixote that she's a princess to go ahead and that she is from Ethiopia and she needs, say, her kingdom back because of some giant guy or something. And then he's like, okay, except Sancho did not really like it that much at first because he realized that if he becomes the governor of an Ethiopian island, also there's no such thing as an Ethiopian island, he would actually become... Well, he had to have his subjects would be all black. According to the book. Okay, that actually makes sense. And considering that he's Spanish, that could be a big problem if your subjects are black, especially if you have that kind of stereotyping that all blacks are bad and all whites are good. And then he actually brightened up by actually thinking that he could just sell, by realizing he could just sell all these people. Okay, that is worse. Also, you get a good profit. That is not something to do. Okay, do not try to sell their friends as slaves. Do not make that mistake. And so that happened, and they went ahead and they went back to the inn, where it turns out is that blanket incident happened. I should have mentioned this last episode, where Don Quixote was allowed to go away without any pay, but when Sancho Panza wasn't even able to pay the rent, he was put in the blanket and tossed up and down in the blanket as if he was on a trampoline, just for the fun of the people and for his suffering as payment. I guessing that actually do make sense too. And so they to go ahead to the place where there was the blanket incident, and the Don Quixote finds the first person he rescued, this little slave boy who was being whipped by his master. And then turns out the master was pretty angered by this and took all his anger on the little boy and just got him hospitalized until then, which actually made sure that Don Quixote is public message number one for the minute that he became Don Quixote. Don Quixote says, "I'll avenge you for you," and they're like, "Just leave him alone. He wants you to leave him alone too. Just leave everyone alone, won't you? You're not in the knight errant era." The last part is probably in her head, but then that happens. And so then this happens. Next up, we go ahead and go into the inn, where the innkeeper actually believes all these chivalry stories. And then the priest is pretty concerned about this, saying, what would happen? Thinking hey, stop reading these books. You might actually become like Don Quixote. See what happened to Don Quixote, this old man who spent all his days and sometimes forgetting to eat and just kept reading the story. And then the innkeeper actually assured the priest that he wouldn't go mad because he actually believes these stories as long ago history and that these histories are gone now and it's now a new world order now. There's a new world order now. And then it was interrupted, and there was a reading about the chivalric novel, and then it was interrupted by Don Quixote coming, Sancho Panza coming downstairs saying that Don Quixote is fighting the giant, and then they go up. Turns out there's a lot of blood flowing, but turns out all that blood was red wine, and the person that Don Quixote is fighting is actually basically he's sleep fighting wineskins, which is the reason why those wineskins are leaking red wine. And Don Quixote is basically brandishing a sword and saying, "I just killed a giant! Look at all this blood! Oh wait, they're wineskins and this is red wine. Okay, okay, as I already told you, Sancho Panza, this castle is enchanted, and so this is why this could all change. It's from my nemesis." And so that happens, and Sancho Panza doesn't really buy it, but he's like, okay, master. And basically that happens. This is just basically the most stupidest thing that could have ever happened in the whole Don Quixote book. Next up, it ends up with Don Quixote finally realizing that his quest is over now, that he can do whatever he wants again, and that he can go back to Dulcinea and say, "I've just done the bravest thing ever." Basically, that's what happens. And then, there we go. The priest and Barbara realize that this story has just ended, and that they really need to cook up a new story right now, just to convince Don Quixote to get away back to his home, at least, just to get him back home at least. And so they decide to actually do something. They capture Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, and they put them into a wooden cage, and then they're like, okay, Don Quixote, this wooden cage is very enchanted, and you cannot move at all. In fact, unless you get out of this cage, you'll not even be able to move 1 inch further. Sancho Panza will be riding outside and walking outside with you, and now we will be heading back to your home. You must stay there right now. Into that, and he's like, Don Quixote's like, okay, and saying like, and sorcery, this is sorcery, I can't move. Sancho Panza tries to make Don Quixote see some sense by trying to prove to him that he can move and asking him, do you need to urinate? And Don Quixote realizes that he needs to urinate and responds with peeing on himself, which is not something you should do unless you are a big baby. Like, a big baby, I mean like 2 or 1 year old. In the meantime, however, this happens. Turns out that Don Quixote is let out of the cage just for a little bit, and then he felt like, and then the fat like guy who was passing by just saw Don Quixote in the cage, and then during the cage, he literally like just was pretty intensified and was mystified by all this, and said, government censorship will fix all these problems. And the priest said agreed, and basically government censorship is again reintroduced and reiterated and studied in the books 1984 and Brave New World, and possibly even Animal Farm, although it has a very indirect sense to it all. So that's happened, and now what we do? Well, this happens at the end, and when they arrive back home, Don Quixote has no idea where they are, because he actually has no idea where they are right now. He's confused. How are you here, niece and servant? How are you here? I'm supposed to be there. And unless you came to visit me. And they just put him back in his bed while Sancho Panza goes ahead and chats with his wife, trying to say why being a squire is the best thing possible, and that being a governor is the best thing possible that could happen of being a knight squire. So that happens. And Don Quixote is put into sleep, and then a priest and Barba give the niece and servant instructions on what to do to their uncle and master if he tries to escape again, and just to keep a watch on him and everything. All the shutdown advice, the godly unuseful advice about how to keep Don Quixote at home, and they were actually pretty frantic about this and saying, we curse you, books of chivalry, and do not let Don Quixote escape again. We do not know what we'll do if Don Quixote goes again. And that's exactly what happens. Don Quixote still thinks he's Don Quixote, so he decides that I'll go on a third set of adventures. Woohoo! And so that happens. However, according to the narrator of this book, it says that he was just translating the original adventures of Don Quixote, although he's looking for a second manuscript, although he can't actually find any second manuscript that was verified from a very reputable author that should be believable, because he actually wrote some things that were pretty good, and he just gave us some source material about where he got all these information from, some of them in like a different language, if I'm honest. And so that happened, and Don Quixote ended there. But he did promise a second sequel, also not directly. He just said there will be a second book to Don Quixote 2. Also, it took 10 years to write it. Well, at least publish it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Until next time, Shana now, peace! Side note, this is just part 1 of Don Quixote. Please watch out for part 2.